If there's anything that anyone who has ever written a book or has ever tried to write a book can agree on, it's that it is really difficult. Honestly, non-writers probably just sit around wondering, why are they doing this to themselves? Because sometimes it can kind of be a chore. That doesn't stop us, of course. We still love to write. Those of us who write novels or are trying to write novels, aspiring authors, published authors, there's a reason why we do what we do, and there's a reason why it's worth it. And I've talked about the reasons why in so many of my videos. I've talked about why I love to write and the process, the pros, the cons, a little bit of everything. I've talked you through a lot of that. But one thing I haven't just sat down and done is talked about the absolute most challenging things about writing a book. I've written 3 so far, and no, I'm not published. Everybody always asks me that, but honestly, the majority of us, our first book is not gonna be that great. I mean, think back to the first of anything that you've done. Probably wasn't that good. It takes a little bit of practice. So my first book was terrible, my second book was meh, and now I'm working on revisions for my third book, which I'm hoping is gonna be my first really good novel. Even though I'm no Stephen King, I've only written 3 books, I still think that those are enough now to kind of figure out, for myself at least, what are the hardest things and the biggest challenges about sitting down and actually finishing a novel from the beginning until the end. And of course, this list is not gonna be exhaustive because that's probably impossible. So if you guys have any more to add to this list, definitely let me know in the comments. But these are my biggest challenges, I think, when it comes to writing a novel. Let's start by just getting the first most obvious one out of the way, and it's also one that I've talked about a lot, but that is just having or making the time. It takes a lot of hours to write a book. A lot. If you've not actually done it before, whatever you're imagining it's gonna take, just double it, triple it, quadruple it, multiply it times the biggest number that you can possibly fathom. That's probably a little bit more like the time it's gonna take you. For full-time authors, they can devote their days to it. It doesn't mean it's easy, but in terms of finding time, that's kind of their main priority. But of course, to get to be a full-time author, you have to earn that. So you have to start where I am and where probably a lot of you are as well. And you have to start by squeezing it into your spare time after school or after work or on the weekends or just whenever you can find a little, wedge of time to squeeze in a bit of writing. That's where you've got to do most of your work. So considering how many hours it takes and how few hours you actually have in a day, in a week, in a month, yeah, it's a long process. If it's something you really want to do, of course, that's just the commitment you're going to have to put into it, but it doesn't make it easy. It's definitely a huge challenge no matter how passionate you are about your project. I mean, you do need to sleep once in a while and eat once in a while and see humans once in a while. The second big challenge is keeping all of your details straight. When you're working on a short form project, this is probably a lot less important, but when it comes to a novel, that's a lot of details you've got going on in your head. Preferably also got going on in a document that you've organized very nicely and written everything down so that you don't just forget stuff. A lot of people who don't write have this idea in their head that writers just magically know all these things about their plot and about their characters and about their world, and they're never gonna forget anything because they created it after all. But actually, in reality, you might not remember the name of your character's ex-boyfriend, or you might not remember that particular little rule about the magic and how it exists in your world. I mean, let's face it, it's a lot of details and it's a lot of stuff to remember when your mind is also working on other things, like trying to write your story and trying to worry about sentence structure and trying to worry about expression and trying to worry about character dialects and ways of speaking. And there's a lot of stuff going on when you're writing a book. So the fact that you forget a name or color of eyes or little details like that, that's pretty normal. Add on top of that the fact that you probably change stuff too, like when you change a little thing in your plot, or you change a backstory for a character, or you change the way rules work in this, the world that you're building or something. You might get a bit confused. You might forget, did I change that? Did I not change that? How did I change that? Which one of these options did I change it to? You have a lot going on in your head. So at the end of the day, you need to take notes and you need to try as hard as you can to keep all your details straight, and don't take it for granted that you will. The third challenge to writing a book is staying committed, even when things get tough. Writing a book is a little bit like having a relationship, actually. It's kind of like the start of a new relationship. You start getting into it, you start really feeling like it's great and it's going so well, and then you hit a roadblock, and then you hit another roadblock, and then you hit another roadblock, and you start to wonder, is this really worth it? Should I keep going? Should I stay committed to this book? No matter what's causing the troubles or doubts, there will just be a lot of strain on your commitment to your project at some point in your book. Now, I'm not saying that means you should continue your book, because I don't know, maybe you've started something that you don't like anymore. Maybe it's a really old project that you've been working on too long. It's not always the best idea to keep going on something that you don't like anymore. You're gonna have to be the judge of that, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, if you want to finish something, you gotta stick with it. Another thing that's hard to stick with is a schedule. Creative projects in general are very, very hard to plan, and it's very, very hard to actually sit down and force yourself to do it at certain times of day or at certain, times in the week. It's really hard to stick to a schedule. We've all probably tried to convince ourselves that it's better to wait until we're feeling inspired, but at the end of the day, if you want to finish a book, you can't just wait for inspiration to strike. And most people who would advise you to wait for inspiration to strike have probably not finished a novel. Sorry to be harsh, but probably the reality. No matter what kind of timeline you want to put yourself on or what kind of schedule you want to choose for yourself, it's really important, if you want to be productive and if you want to actually finish the novel, it's really important to put yourself on a schedule. But it's one of the hardest things to do. Creativity just doesn't like to cooperate all the time, so it's really hard to put on a schedule. The fifth difficult aspect of writing a book is getting past any roadblocks you might encounter with your novel by yourself. Writing is a very solitary task. Even if you have other writer friends, when you actually sit down to do your sessions, even if you're sitting at a table with people, although if you're like me, you kind of prefer not to be sitting at a table with people, but no matter where you are, you're gonna be working on something completely by yourself, and your project's going to be yours. So when you encounter issues with your project, when you run into troubles, when you have roadblocks, when you don't quite know where to go with your plot or with a character, basically just all the low points of your writing, when you need somebody the most, you don't really have anybody. You can talk to people, you can let them read snippets, you can explain to them where you are, what's going on, but at the end of the day, they're not gonna really be as invested in your work, even if you give them all the information you can possibly think of. They're not gonna have the same approach to your work as you are, and they're not gonna have the same depth and understanding of your work as you do. Honestly, they would have to read everything that you've written and then probably also know certain things about what's to come in order to help you make a big decision, like where should you go with a certain aspect or how should you portray this certain scene. It's kind of difficult to make those judgment calls without having the perspective that you have as the writer. So that means that you're kind of just left on your own to figure out those things, and it can be really, really solitary. Possibly the most frustrating thing on this list is knowing when to stop, because we never want to. No book, no story, no creative project in the world is perfect. That's just a fact. And as much as we want to get this in our head and tell ourselves this, it's very, very tricky to actually apply to our work. When do you actually know when it's good enough to stop? Even the best of authors want to go back and edit the works that they've written. That's just the way it is. And no matter what you do, if you read your book over and over, you're gonna want to fix so many things, and you're gonna want to change. Not even just fix, just change things. You're never gonna be 100% satisfied with your book. That hurts just to say out loud. So at some point, you just have to decide that what I have is good enough, which sounds terrible, but you have to make that judgment call of when it is at its best that you can do without just like losing your mind. That's really tough when you're invested in a project, especially something as big as a novel that you've put so many hours in, so many weeks, months, probably years in a lot of our cases, and you just have to kind of make that call of, this is where I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna change anything. Can you see me stressing out a little bit, just imagining? Thankfully, this is not a step you have to even think about until you're at the end of writing the book, so you've already made it through so many of these other challenges, so hopefully you're kind of at a place where you can decide that. But since I have yet to do that with my current novel, the one that's like my baby and I love it so much, I can already tell it's gonna be way harder than with my other books. And finally, the seventh and final thing that I'm going to talk about in this video is sharing your novel. Okay, so we've already gone over the fact that you've spent a lot of time on this thing and probably a lot of your life on this thing. You've poured a lot of heart and soul. It's your passion project. So when do you actually want to open up and give it to somebody else and prepare yourself for an outside opinion? This varies a lot by writer. Some people love to do it as soon as they read a chapter, they just send it off and they want someone to read it, they want feedback. Other people want to wait until they have a few chapters or half the book or maybe even a whole first draft. Some people want to actually revise quite a bit before they ever give it to someone else. And I'm not gonna say which one's better or worse, there's pros and cons, and a lot of that's just gonna depend on you. But no matter who you are and no matter how eager you are for someone to read it, it's still gonna be kind of tough, and it's gonna be a bit stressful probably, and a little bit just at least monumental. Let's just say that. Probably for the people who send off their draft right away, it's less stressful. But especially for us, like those of us like me who like to wait a little bit and want to have a decent, complete work before they share it. I mean, I did share my novel before it was complete with select few people like very close to me, but I haven't shared it yet with anybody like fellow writers or, you know, people who are just interested in reading it. I haven't shared anything yet of that. So I'm definitely one of those who likes to keep the thing for myself for as long as possible because I want to make it really really good. So this is a very difficult step for those of you who are like me. It's kind of another one of those moments like the last one I talked about of when is it ready? Like, when do you know that it's good enough to show to even a tiny part of the world? Not everybody yet, but even just sharing it with select people. It's tough as a writer to kind of open up and to decide when it's ready and to let it go. So have I scared you off from ever writing a book now? That's definitely not the goal, because at the end of the day, writing books is so worth it. I love it and I want to continue to do it. I really hope to make it a much bigger part of my life in the future as well. So if you're feeling like you need a little bit of reassurance, then let that be it. I also have a ton of other videos where I talk about writing and I can like boost you back up if you're feeling down right now. If you're a writer as well, especially a novel writer, then definitely let me know in the comments if you have anything more to add to this list. Like I said, it's not at all exhaustive because that's probably impossible to do an exhaustive list about this. And if you want to stay up to date with my novel and how things are going, then definitely, first of all, subscribe to me here if you're not already subscribed. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram, especially Instagram, because I do a lot of Instagram stories about my novel. Thank you so much for watching. I hope all of your writing projects are going really, really well, and I will see you soon in another video.